Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is December 26, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Also want to thank the New York Finnegan's Wake Group for introducing me to Keith Nightenhelser. Thanks, Keith. Where are you calling in from?
Rural Indiana, West Central Indiana, Putnam County.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
To do something worthwhile with other people, I would say. I mean, you can hardly do anything worthwhile without other people, entirely alone. So I would say that's the answer.
I like that. I agree with you. What's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
It's hard for me to judge. You know, it's bad to be a judge in your own case. I would say probably books and physical books as opposed to just e-readers because you can move around in them so readily. But, you know, it's hard not to turn on the radio and watch some videos and hang out with your friends and talk to them. All of those are pretty good sources.
Did you become a reader, one, because your parents told you to, two, they did as an example, or three, on your own?
I didn't become a reader until I went to grade school, so my parents did not push me into it. But reading was around the house, you know, compared to the other houses in the little hamlet and the rural area where I grew up in Indiana. We had a lot of books and magazines around. One of the rooms in the house we moved to when I was 10, that's still in the family, was actually called the reading room. You know, that's where my father would come home and get the newspaper out. And so both my parents were big readers. They never pushed me though. I just like to read.
Beautiful. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think we're actually hardwired to do it in a bunch of different ways. And, you know, we've learned how to make that to excel beyond what our natural genetic endowment is in gathering information. But I think we're just hardwired to do it. And then, of course, you're in a community and the community encourages you to do it further, at least sometimes. So I would say that's the reason. Are you aware, Jerry, of this thing called the Dunbar number?
Tell me about it.
Well, it's a product of some informed theorizing by people that do psychology and neuroscience. The idea is that humans are basically hardwired to be social and to keep track of what the other humans around them are looking at, thinking about, desiring to do, intending. And the Dunbar number is the upper limit, supposedly, on how many other people you can try to have mental pictures of. And it's disputed how big the number is. But if there is such a thing as a Dunbar number, that's a kind of hardwired limit to how many people you are programmed to try to tune in on around you, then that sort of goes with the view that we are hardwired to know, particularly about what other people are thinking, wishing, looking at, and so on. And that's an unusual feature. I mean, that's something that other primates don't do this about their fellows to the extent that humans do, or at least most don't, I think.
It's beautiful. I want to look into that because there are two things that evoked in me is I heard of recent years that humans really only need about 150 people, or I don't know if that's the right number.
That's roughly the size of the Dunbar number.
Yeah, there are about 150 people that we don't need to know that there's an earthquake on the other side of the world because we're trying to deal with the 150 people in our community. And then the other one was someone told me if you gossip and you complain, you live longer. I'm glad you laughed at that one. Okay, do thoughts create emotions?
Sure, of course.
Yeah. Fill in the blank, Keith. Oh, go ahead. You want to answer?
Well, when you remember something you were ashamed you did, you're liable to sort of have a recurring feeling of an echo of the feeling of shame that eventually came to you from doing that thing you shouldn't have done. And if your memory is initially just a thought about something that happened in the past, then a thought has created an emotion. Though I don't
Yeah.
know if I want to grant you the distinction between thought and emotion. It may be that we cannot really tell our mental states apart well enough to say something is only thought and not emotion at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's me and you versus the wording on the question. So I'm always open. Some of these questions at the beginning are, is it more this or more that? Well, of course it's both and it depends, but we're just using them as prompts to suss things out. So yeah, I'm always welcome to rewording the questions or saying I can't answer it or saying
It's
whatever.
really interesting that one of the regular tropes in science fiction is that there are aliens who don't have emotion. They have
Yeah.
thought, they don't have emotion.
Yeah.
And it's like that's like this amazing thing to try to imagine if you're a human being, which
Yeah.
might be an indicator that we just have these two things stuck together permanently.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyways, we'll get into that in a couple seconds. Fill in the blank, Keith. I don't know what I think until I
Talk about it or write about it, probably.
yeah. Well, that's McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. And Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. So you covered the waterfront there. Can humans think without language?
Yeah, of course, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Language is a really flexible tool. So one thing you can try to do is to find to sort of create better language. Scientists do that all the time. That's why
Yeah.
you can't understand what the oncologist is saying to the other oncologist, right? They've got their own lingo that they've devised to describe what they're doing.
Yeah.
So that's one thing you can do. But sometimes you just need to go away. Like if you're trying to write something and you get stuck, you might just need to go away and play pool or the like.
Yeah. It's funny you said science because I just came across this line in an article about Joyce. Noam Chomsky's dictum that we always learn more about ourselves from literature than from science. What do you think of that line?
Well, it depends on what you want to know about yourself. I think how to understand your own feelings and maybe how to live with feelings that you aren't so happy with. You might learn more about that from literature if you're just on your own. But if you've got a really smart psychotherapist, he might have learned a lot of cool things from books that can guide you to find this out, to find a way out of it faster than you will find it out by reading Milton and Dante. So
Yeah.
I don't know. You have to try and find out.
Very good. You kind of already answered this, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I'd say we're more feeling beings. I think that's what drives people to make the real big decisions. I mean, they make you make a big decision on the spur of the moment, and then you think later about how you're going to live with it a lot of the time. So you probably know the distinction from Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, between system one and system two, where you make a snap judgment with system one, and then with system two, you work out logically from first principles of science how to do it. I think our big decisions often involve a whole lot of system one.
Yeah. It's interesting because I always repeated Ginsburg's first, or Ram Dass Ginsburg, one of them, first thought is best thought. And then it was in the wake a couple weeks ago, first thought is best thought in so many words. So I was wondering where the origin of that first thought, best thought.
I don't know. I think that depends a lot on the thinker. Someone like Ram Dass or Ginsburg or Joyce had spent a lot of time reflecting on things and had absorbed a lot of information. And I think first thought, best thought might work a lot better for them than for a 3-year-old or for someone who's been getting a whole lot of bad information crammed in their head because of the environment they're in. So I think I would not take first thought, best thought to be a regularity. I would say it's a good thing when it's true.
Two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Well, if you want to say there's a soul, sure. I'm happy to say there's a soul. Uh, I might not want to say it's the most fundamental reality, but I'm not ready to deny that it is either.
Second Turing question. Can machines think?
Well, am I a machine? I fancy that I think. I fancy that I'm a whole lot of processes that are basically mechanical, that involve, lots of chemical interactions in a structure that's been built up from biological heritage that I have. And so I'm committed to the view that I can think, and I may be verging on the view that I'm a machine. So then I'm forced to say yes. But I guess if you're talking about non-biological entity, because I would say that ants think, and their lives are pretty much mechanized and driven by their genetic endowment. But if you're asking whether humans are going to build a machine that will think, I'd say that's an open question. I'd say we don't know that yet.
Yeah. Yeah, that was great. You answered it right off the bat with the question. So you won, Keith. This series is about inventing new questions and new metaphors, like the Irish. The guy goes up to the Irishman and goes, I hear you Irishmen answer questions with a question. And he goes, we do, eh?
Excellent.
Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I guess meaning, because I don't know how to find I'm not sure about happiness, except in doing something worthwhile, so pursuing meaning is doing something worthwhile. So I guess happiness is, I view happiness more as a side effect of pursuing some project that I think is worthwhile.
Yeah, I got it from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. He says happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning does.
Yeah, that's a really important book for a lot of people. That's a very helpful book, I think. Frankly.
Yeah. But does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it or more so creating it?
Well, the question isn't well formed because you said we. And if this we is what is conscious, then the consciousness is already there. I mean, we do not consciously perceive the brain. I'm pretty sure of that. And if we didn't have the brains we had, we wouldn't be conscious. I'm pretty sure of that. So, I guess I would say that consciousness is an effect of the brain as far as we can tell, but the only way we have to judge that is by use of our consciousness to do scientific work to figure out what the brain is doing. So we're kind of trapped in a hard to escape circle here.
Maybe it's like a Mobius strip or the snake eating its tail.
There's something to that. Yes, there's something to that.
What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Speed of light's got to be faster. If I hold to the view that my brain is running on mechanical features of the world that are due to physics, because that's the limit for physics.
Audre Lorde, the poet, says you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
Boy, that's a tough one. I sort of prefer the older tools. I prefer having a broad education in everything, including engineering, history, and then trying to use that to solve problems. But I'm not sure that's going to work. So I guess I'm a kind of a empiricist in a way, and use a tool and see if it works, and then if it doesn't work, improve it. The history of the Industrial Revolution is the history of getting better and better tools. Get a good lathe, then you can make the cylinder for a steam engine. Get a steam engine, then you can mechanize I don't know what, manufacturing and make a lot of lathes and so forth.
It's good. Yeah, that's good. And you put the questions into the context you want. Just because I said new, you can switch it. Well, I'll tell you about the old tools. That was good, Keith. I appreciate this.
Well, it might be that the old tools are the new tools for a lot of people.
Yeah.
If you're drowning in a consumer culture that forces you away from just sitting in a room and thinking about stuff and, learning really cool, worthwhile things about like history and calculus and chemistry and how people have failed or succeeded in getting along with each other in literature and in history. If those are those old tools might be new to a lot of people because they haven't had the opportunity because of their circumstances to acquire those tools.
Yeah, I read in Forbes magazine a month ago that millennials want to go back to pre-internet. It's like, yeah, right. Who ran that survey? But it could be true. What new toy do you suggest?
Oh boy, I don't know. I'm not an early adopter, so a new toy. Well, I don't have any good ideas about a new toy, frankly. I just don't. High-speed rail in the US would be my favorite new toy.
High-speed rail is good. All right.
In the US. But I'm not going to hold my breath for that one.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
I really don't have a whole lot of worries when I go to bed at night.
That's good.
I guess I in the back of my mind, I'm always worried about the house burning down and an earthquake and that kind of stuff. But that's sort of that's something everybody ought to be worrying about, but you can't do much about specifically as long as you remember to turn off the stove in the kitchen.
Very good. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Keith, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
I think because it's hard to figure them out. I mean, if you're going to be scientific about it, you would have to have an experimental group that was exposed to the invention and a control group that wasn't. And they'd have to be human subjects, and that's unethical. So, in principle, you can't find it out without being, Dr. Mengele. And we don't want any Dr. Mengeles running around. So we let these inventions proliferate and we try to figure out what they're doing observationally, but not experimentally. But that's it's very hard to figure out what they're doing if you've only got observation and not experiment, I guess. There's a huge amount of speculation about the internet and now about AI. And I just think we have a very hard time seeing what's going to happen. Can I present a thinker back to you?
Please.
Well, you've probably heard of Karl Popper.
Yeah.
Who's famous for writing the book about the book against totalitarianism. But he wrote this other book, and he's famous for his philosophy of science, his falsification-based philosophy of science. He wrote this other really good little book, though, called The Poverty of Historicism. And the book has a really cool, clever, clear little argument. What he's calling historicism is a theory that says you can predict the future, like Marx thought he had. Or maybe if you interpret him as that way, like Hegel thought he had. And, everybody's running around trying to predict the future, even though it's very difficult, like the poor bastards that have to decide interest rates for the Federal Reserve. It's easier to get it wrong than to get it right in predicting the future. So Popper's very clever argument, in my opinion, is that given the way science works, it's impossible to predict inventions. And important inventions have humongous effects on the future. So that means if we're right about science, it's impossible to do much in the way of predicting the future.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't do something about global warming and about, running out of antibiotics that work. We know those are threats, but to really predict the future is hard. There's a really great interview, I thought, with some science I've seen with some science fiction writers, Asimov, Harlan Ellison, Gene Wolfe, that was on a Chicago talk show. And they were talking about science fiction writers as predictors of the future. And I think Asimov observed that many science fiction writers predicted television, and many science fiction writers predicted landing on the moon. And none of them ever predicted landing on the moon with television so people could watch it. That's pretty interesting to me, that blind spot in predicting the future among science fiction writers.
Yeah, especially if you get into the theory that Kubrick got his lens for Barry Lyndon from the U.S. government because they had the only the copy of the lens, so he shot the moon landing footage.
No, I think the story of Barry Lyndon and shooting by candlelight is just an amazing, amazing story. Wonderful story from the film world.
And in you said something there about Karl Popper. Now I can't remember, but anyways, that you brought up a lot of.
Popper's the guy who couldn't predict the future. He wrote the Poverty of Historicism along those lines.
I'm definitely gonna look into that. McLuhan said the future ain't what it used to be.
Amen, brother.
Yeah. Do artists have moral obligation?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, it'd be bad for artists to convince a whole lot of people that something evil was different from evil, that it was a good thing. And if artists can be persuasive, they have some kind of moral obligation. But their main obligation maybe is not in an ethical realm at all, but in an aesthetic realm. They have an obligation to make good art. And the whole question about the obligations of the artist versus the artist's own character and moral acts is a very tough one. But I think basically we have to evaluate the artist as artist and the artist as person differently with different yardsticks.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Old ideas, I guess. Old ideas. Yeah.
Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
I remember being under a table and looking up at the sunlight through windows as one of my earliest memories. To actually date a memory, I think that I remember watching The Honeymooners on TV when it was first on, which is like 52 or 3, and I'd have been 2 or 3 years old at that point.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it's a blessing. I mean, we wouldn't have human lives if we didn't have memories. So,
yeah.
Can I tell you an interesting story about memory as a blessing?
Please.
I just learned of this yesterday, well, a few days ago, from a book that was published by the New York Review Publishing Company, and I don't recall the name of the author. The author was a well-educated Pole who was an officer captured at the beginning of the Second World War, and he wound up not being massacred like most of the Polish officer corps, but sent away to a prison camp for Polish officers in the north of Russia, where the Russians tried to re-educate these well-educated Poles to be socialists, to be communists, really. It didn't take. But to keep themselves from going crazy, they organized a lecture series for themselves. And this guy was a painter by training, but he had become an expert on Proust as Proust's books were coming out in the 1920s. So he organized a lecture series about Proust for these guys who were freezing to death and starving in a prison camp to keep their spirits up. That's pretty damn amazing. And he couldn't have done it without his memory. He found himself, he misremembered a lot of things. We can tell that because his lectures were written down. And then they got smuggled out of Russia and eventually they got published. So now you can read them in English translation, which is really quite amazing. Well, especially for a book that's about memory like Proust. So the way people manage to make it through prison camps, all the stories from the Gulag Archipelago. One of my favorite stories about this is Levinas, the philosopher, who was a French Jew from Lithuania and an officer in the French army who goes to the prison camp the Nazis ran for French officers. So he was not sent to an extermination camp because he was an officer in the French army, though Jewish. In the prison camp, they had books by Dostoevsky. They were tremendously meaningful to him to read these books in a prison camp by Dostoevsky. All that depends on his realizing who he is in the world and on memory, I think.
Yeah. Very good, Keith. I'm open for anecdotes, stories. You're really articulate and concise. I appreciate this. So, tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model. And what specifically was that impact?
The persons that had the most impact on me in my immediate family were probably my mother and my father. I was like an appendage of my father. I followed him around, helping him do things. He was a bit of an engineer. He'd actually been in the Signal Corps as an electronic engineer during the Second World War, but he wound up working in a retail electronics business. But he grew up on a farm, so we did everything ourselves. You know, we repaired our own car, we did our own wiring, we did our own carpentry. And I was the guy that fetched the tools and listened to him explain what he was doing and listened to him tell me not to touch that, which he told me a lot. So I got a lot of influence from him, from his careful way of dealing with the engineering of the world and having some judgment about what things you had to really fine tune and what things you could whack with a hammer. My mother, on the other hand, was ill-suited to be a rural Hoosier wife. She grew up in a prosperous Atlanta, Georgia household and thought when she was growing up that her biggest problems in life were going to be telling the cook and the maid what to do. And then it turned out that she was the cook and the maid. So that was hard on her. So seeing her suffer and how she coped with the awfulness of her life after she wound up stuck in rural Indiana after growing up in a middle-class urban household, that I think I learned a lot from that, but I didn't appreciate it much at the time.
Did they raise you a particular religion?
They were Protestants. My father, a Quaker, had a Quaker background mostly. My mother had a lot of different ideas, but they were all Protestant Christian ideas. I went to a Methodist church when I was growing up, mostly, and I read the Bible a lot when I was a kid. But they didn't say you have to be this or you have to be that. You know, I was free to choose my own way.
Do you pray?
No.
If God exists,
I hope a little once in a while. You know, I hope that the semi doesn't hit me when I'm going down the interstate. I don't know if that counts as prayer.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Everyone's welcome in heaven. Y'all come. That'd be a good one.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I'm afraid I don't believe in the devil either. So I have to say that some people lose their way so far that they're really, really evil. You know, they don't have a reckoning about what their obligation is to other people, and they're willing to do anything. You know, in ancient Greek, one of the words for someone who is an evildoer is a panorgos, which means someone who will do anything. If there are no limits to what you will do, you're a panorgos.
How do you spell that word?
Panourgos. Panorgos.
Panourgos.
Panorgos. There's a sort of interesting story about this, actually. The great Renaissance writer Rob Lay, who wrote Gargantua and Pantagruel, invented a character named Panurge, who's clearly modeled on this guy. And he's a rascal. You know, he's a schemer. He's a scammer. He's a liar. You know, he's always trying to do bad things. There's a story in his novel about how a woman disregards him. A fancy woman of fashion in Paris disregards him, this guy Panurge. And so Panurge gets the sense of a lot of different bitches, dogs in heat, and somehow gets them applied to her fur coat. And then when she goes out in public, her life is a living hell. He does that kind of thing. So the main character in Gargantua and Pantagruel is Pantagruel, who's a giant and is a sort of a perfect human prince. And he makes Panurge, after he meets him and sees what he's like, he makes him his best friend. One of the most miraculous friendships in literature. Even though Panurge keeps doing terrible stuff, Pantagruel keeps him as his friend.
Wow.
It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to contemplate, I think. But it reflects the Christian idea of forgiveness.
Yeah.
And what you have to do to be a real Christian.
that author's last name is spelled what?
Rabelais,
Oh,
Rableis.
Rabelais. I thought you said
Rabelaisian, right? And as you know,
Rabelais.
reading Joyce, there's lots of weird French words that
Yeah,
Joyce just copied down from a book about Rabelais' vocabulary and then
yeah,
salted all through Finnegan's Wake for flavor.
yes, you're right. But really, Keith, what I'm asking is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think there's a lot of truth in that. You have to think in yourself what your project is that has made this person fall into the category enemy, and ask yourself, is my project some of the reason for that? I think there's a lot of truth in that. But as to your general question, since I'm an American and our tradition is to always light out for the territory if something's going wrong, my first response is just to try to stay away from the enemy.
Yeah.
And, my family stayed away from its enemies to the extent that it moved as far west as Indiana. You went a little farther. You're all the way on the Pacific coast, right? So you must have had some really serious enemies back there in your family history to go that far to get away from them.
That's funny because I was raised in Flint, Michigan, but I've been in Venice for 43 years. And I was married in Paoli, Indiana, which is 90 minutes from you.
Yep, Paoli, down in coal country.
Yeah.
Did you marry a Hoosier lady?
I did not. I married a California girl, and I was lucky. But the funny thing is, we'll get into James Joyce. But the day we decided to get married in Paoli was a day we were reading the wake, and there's 3 references on the page to marriage, marrying, and man and wife.
Yep.
And the word paoli was on the page, spelled exactly like paoli. Yeah.
Have you heard about the medieval tradition called the Sortes Virgilianae?
Tell me about it.
Well, the Roman poet Virgil, who's really magnificent, but it takes some figuring out to see why, was magnified in medieval tradition into being a magician and having prophesied the coming of Christ and Christianity, a whole lot of things. So one of the crazy results of this was the practice that was called basically throwing the Virgil dice. The Latin for it is Sortes Virgilianae. And what you would do is you'd flip through a copy of the Aeneid and you just shut your eyes and put your finger down on a line, and that line was the prophecy. So you've sort of done that in your choice of paoli and marriage on that day with the wake.
Well, yeah, but ours was backwards. We decided to get married in paoli, and then perchance it just happened that way.
You think you ought to go to war, so you go ask the oracle, should I go to war? And he says yes. That's what you did.
Very good. Now,
I hope you're enjoying the Hoosier sunset behind me.
It's beautiful, man. I love it. You're lighting it. The lighting on both of ours is amazing. So, Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. My friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. Gregory Bateson says, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, whoa, I did something morally and socially wrong? It's a lot of prompts, Keith, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
I wouldn't want to generalize about criminals. And I think there's a lot of different ways to, try to control crime. I think most of the state constitutions in the United States, I know that of Indiana has this, say that the purpose of punishment is rehabilitation.
Yeah.
But we don't really carry through on it very well. We've kind of given up on rehabilitation. And I think we incarcerate way too many people, and we need a lot more social workers
Yeah.
and transitional housing for people that aren't able to cope with our environment, rather than punishment. Punishment works for some people, though. There's a lot of things that I would say in my own history I've thought twice about, just because they bore with them a risk of punishment.
Yeah.
And the threat of punishment does some good. That's not the same, though, as saying the punishment is doing the good. It's the
Yeah.
threat that's doing the good.
It's good. The threat works. Yeah. So James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, "This is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?" Years later, Faulkner said, "Sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism." Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, we can't not live life. I would add to this a saying by Levi Strauss, or a fragment of one. He thought that the traditions of the ancient Greeks were "quote unquote" good to think with. And that might be the function of a lot of art, especially narrative art, where you've got a character, they take action to try to achieve something, then something results, but it isn't what they achieve, and they have to replan what they want to do. I think that being able to play through failure and success and regret in fiction and in plays and movies can be a real good source of moral education. Lots of people have written about this. Lots of academics have written about this. But the simple faith that people will learn to be better by reading stories in the Bible might actually pan out if you read stories about people who fuck up and then have to really live with it, like, say, King David, or maybe even Jacob. I know there's a lot of stories in the Bible of people not getting what they want and then figuring out how to live with it. So maybe that's a thing to learn from a story like that.
Good to think with. That is really good. Levi Strauss. I appreciate that line. So Keith, walk us through your calling in life. You pursued philosophy, classical studies, educator. Where's your tipping points on what you choose to do with your life, your careers and your callings?
Uh, I guess a lot of my tipping points originate with my high school. My high school it was a small rural school, but it had a pretty good library and a pretty good librarian. So, it had new books about science by Isaac Asimov. I found books in that library completely by chance that were tremendously influential on me. Completely by chance, having never heard of Thoreau, I found Walden to read when I was, like, I don't know, 14. Completely by chance, I found the Oxford Book of American Verse, edited by Auden, which had in it poems by Pound and Eliot, not just Pound and Eliot, but Whitman and Dickinson. But Pound was really influential. I thought I really loved Pound. I fell right away in love with his poems. And that led me to Joyce. And I don't remember anymore where I got my hands on Portrait of an Artist. So I was really very much interested in literature as a result of all this reading that was not required reading, not part of my classes in high school. Some of those classes were good also. And I also, in high school, I started out taking Latin, and then I took a couple of years of French because I got convinced you needed to know more languages, partly because of encountering the likes of Joyce. And I had a very strange, cobbled together education in French. This is starting my junior year. The teacher was the regular French teacher, the wife of a speech and debate teacher who I knew very well at my high school. And then a student teacher came in to teach part of the semester. And then the regular teacher went on pregnancy leave, and a whole new person, a much older woman who was a Montrealer and had a clear Quebecois accent, came in to teach my second semester of French. And then a whole new hire came in for my third and fourth semesters of French. So I had this very strange, spotty high school education in French. And I get to college and I am planning to take French to meet my language requirement and then go on to study literature. And I go to get a placement test in French, which consists of the faculty members sitting me down with the book they use in second year French and asking me to translate it. I forget if it was written or oral, but anyway, it was pretty doable for me. I did it, and he said, "Fine, you met the requirement. You met the language requirement. Go now and study French no more unless you want to." And because of that, I enrolled in ancient Greek. So Ezra Pound to high school French to ancient Greek to then deciding eventually to go to grad school in classics. So there's a tipping point of sorts.
It's really well put. And then over the years, you've written essays, books, fiction, nonfiction, poetry.
Most of my creative work has actually been in pedagogy. It's been figuring out ways to get people to see a book like Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe as interesting. You know, I have published almost nothing. I co-authored a little essay with a friend that's a review, and that gets cited. But apart from that, nothing really.
What is pedagogy in another word? What do you call that?
Coaching.
Coaching. Okay, there we go. There's your key word. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What what role does intention play in your creative process as a coach?
Well, I would bring in Heraclitus to cap what Kubrick said. You know, Heraclitus said nature loves to hide. So he and Kubrick were on the same wavelength, I guess.
Nature loves to hide. Loves to. Well, that's funny because either Matisse or Cezanne said, if you take your painting and stick it in the bushes and it blends in, it's a good painting.
So what was the question again that you led up to with
the question is what role does intention play in your creative process coaching?
Well, I want my students to enjoy reading something that they wouldn't have read with enjoyment or at all unless I had somehow intervened in their experience to read it. And I'm not all, you know, I can't bat, you know, like Pete Rose said, you only got to hit the ball 3 times out of 10 to be in the Hall of Fame. So I do not claim that I'm a huge success at this, but I'm a success some of the time. I'm a success some of the time in getting people to appreciate the hard to appreciate, say, Virgil. I mean, it's not that hard to appreciate Homer's Odyssey. It's a lot harder to appreciate Virgil's Aeneid. So that's a challenge. It's not that hard to appreciate a novel of Jane Austen. It's a lot harder to appreciate Robinson Crusoe for today's generation of students, and so on. So engineering ways to put these books into courses in ways that the students will find it enjoyable to read them and then get some lasting benefit out of them, have some goods in their mind to think with later on. That's what I've tried to do.
Really good, Keith. You know, you ever see the Robinson Crusoe version by Louis Buñuel?
It's lovely. I love that film. Yes.
Great film. And then you evoked a line I love to repeat by Frank Zappa. I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure.
Yes. Well, everybody's a failure, pretty much. I mean, maybe not Joyce, but you know, Nora would have some comment on that, and Lucia, I suppose.
Yeah,
he was a failure.
Yeah,
and his brother certainly.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get into Joyce very soon. Duchamp said, "There's no art without an audience." How much are you thinking of who you're coaching when you're coaching?
Well, you have groups of people that you have to work with, and then you have individuals. So there's really 2 different ways of thinking. You know, if you're teaching a class of 30 people, the biggest class I've taught's been like 100. That's a really different kind of experience. But what I would think was, I want something here that everybody can understand, that's that easy, and I want something here that'll be really challenging and hard to understand for the most able students. I want all of that in the one experience. And that's a tough thing to pull off, but if the material's rich enough, it's doable, I think.
And another question about education. This is McLuhan in 1957, Classroom Without Walls. It's misleading to suppose there's any basic difference between education and entertainment. The distinction merely relieves people of the responsibility of looking into the matter. It's like setting up the distinction between didactic and lyric poetry on the ground that one teaches and the other pleases. However, it's always been true that whatever pleases teaches more effectively. So it's mainly I'm asking, what does this mean? Whatever pleases teaches more effectively. Any comments on that?
Well, the student will want to go ahead and learn on their own if they're finding it enjoyable. And some things it's much easier to make enjoyable than other things, I think. It's really hard to make figuring out how to add fractions with different denominators enjoyable to a third or fourth grader. It's a big challenge, and I am in awe of people who succeed in doing this kind of thing. But once someone gets a little farther along, they might take off and burn like a bright fire with their interest in math. I suppose in a way it's a bit like piano lessons. Not everybody is really keen at first to do them, but some people discover they really like being able to express themselves with a piano and play around on their own with all the ways to vary the intonations and the tempos of really cool music and to create their own music. So, the starting points may be something that is pretty tough to get people to enjoy, but once you get them over that hump and they go of their own like a fire, you've accomplished something.
Keith, one of the main tools that you've explored is the writing utensil, whether it's a keyboard or a pen. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness, like knife and fork extends our teeth, shutter and a camera projector extends our eyelid, and maybe even non-tangible religion or philosophy extends consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend? What humanness?
The capacity for conversation, I guess.
Yeah.
Here I would think of someone like Montaigne, who kind of retires from being involved in politics to go live off by himself, although he keeps getting dragged out of that retirement, with a whole lot of books up in his room, his library. And in the library, he can have conversations with people he considers to be really terrific, interesting figures of the past, like Seneca and Plutarch and Lucretius. And he can have these conversations because they left writing. And then he makes records of these conversations to leave a portrait of himself for people who care about him after he's gone. So that's a way in which writing is just sort of a form of conversation that has a particular unusual formality because one of the persons in the conversation is absent.
Keith, we met through reading group of Finnegan's Wake, and I appreciate your input at that meeting, those meetings. And maybe you can just tell us briefly your history of Joyce. When did you start with in Joyce? Was it by choice or through teachers requiring it? And how much of Joyce have you read? I know, yeah, go ahead.
I've read most of Joyce at this point. I had not read Finnegan's Wake until this year. And of course, it's an endless project to really read it. But because in high school, the high school library had a copy of a book that had Ezra Pound's poems in it, I started to learn about the Pound Circle, and that led me to learn about Joyce. And then in one of the libraries I had access to, I do not remember any longer how this happened. Through one of them, I got my hands on the Viking Portable Joyce, which contained all of Portrait of an Artist, all of Dubliners, and some excerpts and some poems, excerpts from the other prose works and some poems. So I really fell in love with Portrait of an Artist. When I was
that was not required. That was on your own.
All on my own when I was like 14, 15.
Yeah.
And I thought Dubliners was really interesting, but it was sort of complicated. It seemed much more complicated to me because of all these different people interacting in these separate bits of story. And then I had another piece of luck at my college, Wabash College, Crawfordsville, Indiana, tiny college. I signed up for a course with the unpromising title Themes and Forms in Western Literature by a guy who I was really fortunate to encounter, a guy named Owen Dustin, who was completely Harvard educated. And then he comes to Indiana to be a teacher for his whole career. So he had the same kind of, she was living with the same kind of shock my mother was, I expect. So the first semester of this course was all Western epic classics mostly. So we read, Ovid and Homer and Virgil and some medieval stuff. And in the second semester, we read things like Dante and Hamlet and Paradise Lost. And at the end, Dustin did something that is completely insane, in my opinion. We went back and forth in the last month or so of the course between reading chunks of Brothers Karamazov and reading about the first third or half of Joyce's Ulysses. And it was because he had this idea that we should think about fathers and sons. He was interested in teaching big themes. He had a philosophy of teaching the English literature curriculum that was right out of Northrop Frye. That's why it was called Themes and Forms in Western Literature. Yeah. So anyway, I happened to stumble into, I've actually got the notebook here. I found it. And there's a page of notes about Dmitry Karamazov. Then there's a page of notes about Leopold Bloom. And so all through the end of the book. So I had that experience. And then eventually I read Ulysses. I've never been in a class where Ulysses was assigned except for that class. And I've read Ulysses 2-3 times on my own for fun, which means I haven't been under the gun to try to interpret all of the allusions or the topography of Dublin or anything like that. I could just sit back and laugh and enjoy it. Yeah. I also had one other particular good stroke of fortune. When I was in grad school, a very hopeful promoter revived Ulysses in Nighttown, a play that was based on the Circe episode of Joyce that starred Zero Mostel.
Yeah.
It was in New York City, and I got a ticket to go to the previews, which was really fortunate because it closed instantly. Nobody wanted to go to this play. It had been a hit in the in the late 50s, early 60s. They tried to revive it in 75. It failed. But I got to see Zero Mostel playing Leopold Bloom.
Wow.
And reinforced it. And then we met in the Wake group because I've been taking, since the pandemic, to have some contact with people through Zoom, courses from the Newberry Library. And a very fine retired English faculty member offered, as she had done before to the Newberry people, and also as she taught in her university, an introductory course on Finnegan's Wake. And I talked my friend Roger into joining me for this course, and we did it. And in the course, we read maybe a quarter or so, or a third of Finnegan's Wake over like 6-8 meetings and discussed it. And we got some basic grounding. And then Roger and I, starting at the earlier this year, have been every week meeting together on Zoom and reading another, 6 to 12 pages. So together we have read through it, and we eventually started making visits to the New York Joyce group on Zoom. And that's how I encountered you.
Amazing. What's the name of the Newberry Library professor or teacher?
I'd have to look it up. It'll take me a second.
No, that's all right. Don't just send it to me later. Yeah, okay. That would be good. So, how would Joyce, in your opinion, answer those last 3 questions? What does the writing utensil extend? What was his intention, and what was his? How much did he think of his reader? Just your guess on studying Joyce the way you have.
I think Joyce was writing for himself first, in a way.
Yeah.
He wanted to make something that nobody had made before, that was a marvel to look at. He's really he, like Nabokov, I think, are both sort of after effects of the art for art's sake movement.
Yeah.
He really wanted to make something that was a beautiful piece of craft that people who had been studying the craft tradition it falls into, the writing of fiction, would appreciate as extending the craft. And so I think there was that. But then he had a bigger audience. He certainly had gained a giant audience with the success of Ulysses and the notoriety of Ulysses.
Yeah.
And so he then, because he had patronage, was able to spend amazing number of years creating Finnegan's Wake. And the fact that he pulled it off through various writer's blocks, difficult personal circumstances, and so on, even though he had financial support from patrons, is really quite amazing. So there's a way in which Finnegan's Wake is a throwback to the art of the Middle Ages or antiquity, because its creation was not supported by a market. You know, a publisher did not give him an advance exactly, because they were going to be able to make the money back on this thing that it took the guy, how many years? 22 to 38, 16 years to write?
Yeah, 17 years is usually the words. But
right.
What do you think his motive was in Finnegan's Wake?
To impress himself.
I think that is good. And what do you think he would say is the writing utensils extending? What humanness?
Geez, I don't know. There's so much sort of spirit possession in Finnegan's Wake.
What does that mean, spirit possession?
Well, it's what happens to the shaman. You know, the shaman starts beating his drum and then he becomes possessed by a god, or he leaves his body and travels somewhere else. I mean, that seems to be happening a bunch in Finnegan's Wake. It's like an altered state of consciousness.
Yeah.
When the tongue is really set free. The teacher, by the way, who offered the course at the Newberry Library on Finnegan's Wake, is named Susan Bazargan, Bazargan, Susan Bazargan. And she did a very fine job with our little class. Because
send me her email. Send me your email address if you could, or if I'd like to have her on my podcast. But go ahead. What were you going to say?
Well, suppose you were told by someone, "Hey, we want an introductory class on Finnegan's Wake. You can meet for an hour and a half, 6 times. What's on the syllabus?" Suppose they said that to you. Wouldn't that be pretty daunting? Wouldn't that be tough?
mean, I basically have done it for 28 years with my group in Venice, but I mean, I'm just a student. So I attend, I mean, you should attend the Austin, Texas group. It's amazing. I learn. The New York group's amazing, and the Sweeney's in Dublin's amazing. And there's more than 50 Finnegan's Wake reading clubs worldwide. So, I mean, yeah, it's daunting, but it's fun. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Most people, though, who want an introduction don't want 6-hour meetings each on one page.
Right.
Page. So that's the challenge. How do you get someone an overview that's actually useful? That's a really tough challenge, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I can talk to people about Finnegan's Wake at a cocktail party for 2 minutes or 2 hours. So, I mean, I've been there, done that. I love it. It's fun. And it's really, Dublin does it the best. You just read the Wake for an hour and then you kind of have casual discussion. Everybody else has deep analysis for 2 or 3 hours and they only do 1 page. So, but you touched on something that's perfectly timed here, Keith. This is Hollis Frampton, experimental filmmaker. Narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
A lot of our efforts are aimed at that, I think. In video games, people put themselves in dangerous situations where they are killed over and over and over. So I guess that's sort of enjoyable. I suppose they're learning how not to die.
It reminds me of The Tenant by Polanski. Have you ever seen that?
That's a really amazing movie. That's a wonderful movie. Yes, I saw that movie and Kokomo, the film series at Indiana University, Kokomo.
So let's stay on Joyce for a little. how do you interpret what he means by epiphanies and everydayness? What does that mean to you?
I guess people are aware that some moments are unusual in their lives. You know, they're aware that there is such a thing. They're aware of abstractly that there is such a thing as amazement or being in love or I don't know, being terrified or being paralyzed or being hopeless. They've read about people who are in these situations, and then suddenly they discover they're in that situation. They recognize it. You know, it's like the recognition moment that structures drama, where where Oedipus figures out, shit, I'm the guy that killed the former king. It's like that kind of recognition moment.
Yeah.
So I think an epiphany is like that. Now, I think I don't have the sense of epiphany that Joyce would have had because I wasn't raised Catholic, you know, and epiphany is this definite thing that happens in the story of uh, the birth of Christ that leads up to the birth of Christ that Catholics would have been very aware of, maybe in a really deep uh, emotional way. And it's an abstraction to me, the idea of an epiphany, like something like deja vu. You know, I've experienced deja vu, and then I guess I've experienced epiphany as I'm describing it. So that's
Yeah.
the kind of thing it means to me. It'd be interesting to connect it to what Proust writes about when he writes about the things that summon past moments, like the famous Madeline
Yeah.
or other things that he writes about. They're sort of on parallel tracks, maybe, he and Joyce
Yeah.
writing at the same time with these ideas.
It's a good point. How much percentage did Joyce get the wake from 0 to 100? And how much percentage do you get the wake from 0 to 100?
Joyce's score is a lot better than mine. I've not I've not taken
I
the
mean, that's a stupid question, but just your guess at numbers. What would you say he got it, and what do
I
you
would
get it?
want to put a number on it. I would put Joyce up in the 90s, but I'm sure that there are things that Joyce would really love that people have spun up as interpretations that had not occurred to him.
Yeah.
Like, you know, there's a really nice book about Joyce and music called Picking Up Airs, I think it's called. And there's a whole section in it of song, you know, the wake is filled with popular songs from everywhere, especially American pop music. And so the clever boots that wrote this book made some appendices that list all the references to popular songs. And then for a nice lagniappe, they have a final appendix of all the popular songs that Joyce refers to that were written after the book was published.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's humongous. I know exactly what you're talking about.
But my
There's
number would be below 10%, well below 10%. I mean,
okay.
there's just a mountain to climb here, and I'm not very mobile compared to Joyce.
In portrait, Joyce says, I will try to express myself in some mode of life or art as freely as I can and as wholly as I can, using for my defense the only arms I allow myself to use: silence, exile, and cunning. What's your take on those three words? What is he meaning there?
I've never really reflected on them in a really personal way. Silence is the one that's paradoxical. I mean, for an artist to be silent means they aren't putting out work. Cunning is the one that's easiest to see. Exile is in his biography, but it's very strange for him to say that it's his tool, since he is writing obsessively about Dublin. So, you know, he's fixated on what he's separated himself from.
Yeah. You're
Well,
anticipating a question.
that triplet of tools is a kind of mystery to me
Yeah.
to understand.
Then there's another line: Welcome, O life. I go to the encounter for the millionth time, the reality of experience, and to forge in the smithy of my soul the uncreated conscious of my race. What is the smithy of my soul, uncreated conscious of my race? What's your take on those?
Well, I wonder if people have written much about race theory and Joyce. You know, there were these guys in the 19th century, and this goes back to the 18th century, people like Herder, that thought that nations were characterized by having specific outlooks on the world. And this is a kind of dangerous doctrine once the fascists come along and once Nazism comes along. Even you can find even in someone like in the early chapters of Du Bois' amazing book, ought to be taught in American high school to every student, The Souls of Black Folk, this discussion of how each different race brings specific gifts to the world. And and he is insisting there that so will the Negro race, as he called it. He called them the Negro race, I believe. And you might see in what Joyce is saying here, I'm going to do that for the Irish. I'm going to see to it that the Irish are recognized as having a racial contribution to the history of humanity to equal that of the Anglo-Saxon and the French and the German, the Italian, the Hindu, and so on around the world.
Yeah. I spoke with Michael Apted, the movie director, 40 years ago. I says, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922, but it really flourished in the 80s with MTV to the point where Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. Michael Apted said, because we've learned to take in information faster. So I asked this question with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
I think we can. I think there's some good evidence of this. If you look at what film historians have done, there's a book by David Bordwell about how Hollywood storytelling developed in the 40s. And in contrast to the 30s, 40s films would involve lots of complex and often not clearly signaled flashbacks, even flashbacks within flashbacks. And so it looks like, since the Hollywood guys, they're all about making dough. They're into making money. They estimated the audience could actually handle that more complicated sort of storytelling time. So I think that's some evidence that people who were exposed a lot to these stories learned how to take them in faster. I wonder, though, about the 80s. I don't know how many of those music videos were edited as video or edited as film. You know, it's a lot of work if you're actually physically cutting film together to do lots and lots and lots of cuts. Every one is labor. Whereas if you're just putting together pieces of video with a video switcher, it's a lot easier. You're just flipping a switch back and forth. So I wonder how much technology might have influenced the rapid cutting.
It did, but you got to remember, Abel Gance is doing rapid montage in 1922. It's now, just
which film are you thinking of? La Rue or?
I don't know the title. I know Abel Gance is Napoleon's 1927, but
right.
I was told by a film researcher that it was 22 where rapid montage. You could have come before that, whatever. But you know, I mean, you know, this
Soviet films also by then. So
well, Eisenstein said he was influenced by Abel Gance, and here's the phenomenal one. Alice Guy Blanchet did a scene in one of her early films, inventing narrative along with Méliès, which Eisenstein saw when he was 8 years old and basically ripped off the Potemkin eyeglass, stare sequence.
Yes.
Yeah. And he's 8 years old and he's seeing it being made by a woman who got blackballed out of film history. Anyways, Keith, have you taught film too, or are you just a film? Yeah. Okay. So we should do a whole nother thing on film. Let's keep going on this.
A little tidbit about Eisenstein.
Please.
Eisenstein was given the chance to bring out a series of books on great directors in the late 30s. And he wrote John Ford to ask him for permission to be the first guy in the series. And in this in this letter, he talked about how much he admired young Mr. Lincoln. And all of this is actually in the Criterion Collection edition of Young Mr. Lincoln.
Yeah.
well worth having a look at. I just think it's really quite amazing that people were making connections like this through media all over the world. Someone
Oh,
like
yeah.
Einstein admiring someone like Ford, who made a more or less a religion of admiring someone like Lincoln. What an amazing concatenation that is.
Well, Eisenstein was going to make a film with Joyce.
Yes.
That to me is mind blowing too. So good. Let's do film another podcast. But the real hidden question on that taking in information faster is it literally possible to multitask?
I don't know. Ask the neuroscientists. I mean,
What's your
there's a lot of variation in what human beings can do. You
yeah,
know, so I can drive and have a conversation at the same time. I probably couldn't do that as well when I was just starting to drive.
yeah,
I can cook and have a conversation at the same time.
yeah,
I can listen to music and read at the same time. But if it's vocal music, it's a bit harder.
yeah,
So, you know, I think though there are probably some people that are much more capable of multitasking and probably some that are much less than I am. So there's a
yeah.
lot of human variation in any task you care to set.
Yep.
And
What was the motive of the cave artist?
that's just the most wonderful mystery ever. I
Isn't it?
couldn't tell you. I couldn't
What's
tell
your
you.
hunch though? What's your guess or hunch?
Well, I'm a hunter, and my whole community depends on there being game I can kill to live. Or at least I think that's true. Maybe the women with their bean plants and their gathering fruit can feed us for some of the year, but the meat's available when the weather's bad and the fruit's not on the trees. But what I can't fall asleep without worrying about is that I killed the last damn auroch or the last damn deer or the last damn boar. I need
Yeah,
something to make the boar come back. So I need to have a magical ritual to bring back animals. And so a lot of shamanism, I think, in old European civilization originates in magic that is related to hunting. And all of this, I know about this really kind of intellectually from reading about speculation on where stories about Heracles come from. A lot of people think that Heracles is a figure that comes from a shamanic master of animals because he's always bringing animals back. That's a thing that he's always subduing and bringing animals back. So the cave paintings might come from there. Have you ever been able to visit one of those caves, Jerry?
I haven't, but yeah, I've seen Herzog's movies, and I love the question because people usually go off in various directions. It's really good to hear what
It's
you
quite
said.
amazing how fine the painting is. It's just
Yeah,
amazing how fine the painting is.
yeah,
And also the whole story of the discovery of these caves. Kids playing around fall into an opening and bang, there it is. It's just amazing. I was able
yeah,
to actually go through one of the caves that isn't closed yet when I was a lot more mobile in the like around 2004 in Southwest France. And then I also was able to go through Lascaux too. They
no,
built a replica of Lascaux, that cave, which is closed to the public. But the French, with their genius for tourism, created a replica you can go through. So I
nice.
don't anyone who is able to go to Southwest France or Spain and see one of these caves or a replica to try to do so. It's an amazing, amazing human creation.
It's a beautiful thing. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
I guess conviction, because once you make a compromise, you have to commit to it or else it's not going to work. If conviction includes commitment, choosing to commit to something you didn't have in mind earlier, then it's conviction for me. Because unless people stick by their compromise, it's going to fail.
Yeah. In your accomplishments, Keith, how do you rate these three elements? Luck, skill, and ambition. What played the biggest role, second and third?
Well, you have to give a lot of credit to luck. I'm born into an affluent society. There are books around the house when I'm growing up. I like school and I'm able to pursue going to school. All of that's luck, you know. Uh, I I put off starting grad school for a year because I didn't know whether I was going to be drafted. You know, I was in the generation that had a lottery number for getting drafted to Vietnam. I lucked out there, in a way. The guys I knew in college, guys from my college who had really low numbers and got and had to join the military, they all signed up for something special, and many of them actually became career military and retired by their late 40s and early 50s. So in a way, the joke was on me. You know, you get into the right, you know, you're going to be drafted, so you join the military, and then you go to law school and you serve your time and you work as a lawyer in the military, and then you wind up retired with military health care and a pension, and you're not even 50 yet. So
Wow.
it's amazing how luck works. But certainly putting off grad school for a year, that was an interesting experience. But if things had been just a little different, if I'd been a little bit, if I'd been born a little bit earlier, I wouldn't have had that option, and I'd have been in the war, and I probably would have taken the easy way out and gone to a language school or something like that instead of becoming one of the people that was in the shit. By the way, I put a plug in for a book.
Go ahead.
There's a book by a guy named Jonathan Shay, Shay, called Achilles in Vietnam. Shay was a psychotherapist and MD working for the Veterans Administration in Boston with Vietnam veterans that had PTSD. And he, in this book, provides a reading of the experience of Achilles in Homer's Iliad through the eyes of the Vietnam veterans and vice versa. It is a most amazing book.
Wow.
And he has another book about veterans coming home about the Odyssey. So I strongly recommend people that are interested in these issues in PTSD and in classical literature and its relevance to check out Jonathan Shay.
Beautiful, Keith. Thank you. In the other two elements, you talked about luck, skill, and ambition. What played the next role, skill or ambition?
I'd say that to some extent, skill is a product of luck. You know, I didn't grow up where there was a lot of lead in the environment, so I didn't have that bad impact on my development. For instance, so but I grew up being pretty verbal. That was also though a result of luck. I'm the firstborn. Not another kid doesn't come along until I'm 4. I had grandparents and great grandmother all right around me, so I was able to be in a real world of adult verbosity when I was growing up. So I think my skills probably developed because of luck also. You know, the quality of the books in the Tipton High School library where I found Thoreau and found Pound, that was luck. But
Yeah.
it certainly pushed my skills along. And what was the third one?
Ambition.
I was never very ambitious, I think. I mean, looking back, I have to say I don't rank very high on ambition. I wanted to be a college teacher, and I could have been a more successful college teacher as academics rank themselves. But I'm pretty happy with the teaching I was able to do where I was and with the students I had. So
Your observations of humans in general, is ambition based more on fear or more on joy?
fear,
Yeah.
I think fear.
Is loyalty based on reason?
Yeah, partly because you're going to need somebody to help you someday. So partly, you know, if you want to change this, change the term you're talking about to friendship. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics devotes 2 books to the kinds of friendship there are. And the sort of weakest kind of friendship is just for pleasure. You know, you enjoy their company. And the second rank of friendship is for usefulness. I believe it's in that order. So, you know, I can do something good for him and he'll do something good for me. And then the best form of friendship is because the other person is a good person and they see in you that you're a good person. Now, Aristotle thought that good people were actually extremely rare. He has an aristocratic worldview. The really good people there hardly are any of them. So that means
Wow.
that a friendship at the highest level is going to be super rare because two
Yeah.
people that are good have to encounter each other. I love reading Montaigne. Montaigne had a friend that was his lifelong best friend, except the guy died when he was in his 30s or maybe late 20s. He died really young. And so in his essay about friendship, when Montaigne is trying to explain why he was friends with this guy, he just says, because he was he and I was I.
Yeah.
That's friendship at the highest level. That's not
That
because of just enjoyment or just usefulness. It's because of deserved mutual admiration or something like that. Something like that.
I like that. That's beautiful. I like Marlene Dietrich said a friend is someone you can call at 2 a.m.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Sometimes in images, but mostly I guess it's verbal. I don't really know. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, I I guess I'm not self-reflective enough to try to monitor what form my inner dialogue is taking enough to feel like I could reliably be the judge of which language it tends to be in. I don't, I'm just not that high on self-monitoring.
Keith,
You know,
that's
I guess things are going on, multiple things go on at once. You talked about multitasking earlier. You
yeah.
know, when I taught people film studies, I was trying to teach them to watch a film a different way. Watch it as a naive person who's just immersed in the film, and also stand back and watch how the film is manipulating that naive person at the same time.
Oh yeah.
Figure out how the technique of the film is producing the effects that it has. But I don't practice that so much on my own inner theater as I should, if I wanted to answer your question.
No, it reminds me of Abigail Child's a great experimental film maker in New York. I says, what language is your inner dialogue in? She goes, I wish I knew.
she's
That was a
speaking,
great,
she's
beautiful answer.
speaking in tongues to herself.
Say it again.
She is speaking in tongues to herself.
Yeah, that's it. George Manupelli started the Ann Arbor Film Festival over 60 years ago. His mantra is ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technologies, cultures, and environments are dominant?
I think there's a lot of variation in artists. I would agree with Mikas that in a lot of his filmmaking, he's just a medium.
Yeah.
He's passing through the medium of film, the world that he's experiencing.
Yeah.
But I think other artists are a lot more designing. They have a lot, they want to control the experience that someone goes through. Hitchcock would be uh, one of the people usually cited as example of this because he was a control freak. So
Yeah.
was Kubrick, right? I would say Joyce is more on the control freak side than on the medium side, uh, than being a pass through entity. Like I said, like we would say Mikas is. Mikas said Mikas was. So
Can art making be egoless?
probably not. You have to believe in what you're doing. You have to believe in what you're doing. Even if you decide just to let go and make that line happen by painting on the plexiglass, you have to be a person who thinks I can just let go and it will turn out really well. I have no problem with artists um, being a bit egotistical, uh, as long as I admire the art. The closest I've ever come to a really wonderful filmmaker was there was this is like 10 or 12 years ago. There was a restoration of Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song
Yep.
by Melvin Van Peebles.
Yep.
So because I don't walk so great, I sat all the way in the back of the theater. This was in the big theater in the basement of MoMA. And he came in and sat beside me. And we talked during the movie. I regret not exchanging contact information because I would have liked to invite him to come talk at my school. But his films were really driven by his vision of what an African American man should say about America at the time when he made those films.
Yeah.
And that kind of egotism is fine by me.
Yeah. Heavy duty, man. There's a documentary I've been dying to see about him and study his films. I haven't had a chance, and I want to. Is perception reality?
No, but we have to settle for it a lot of the time. You know, we're in a funny circular dialectical mess here, because the only way we can understand the universe is through what we can perceive. It's through human consciousness. And so we build instruments and we have experiments and we use our consciousness to read the meter on the experiment or the oscilloscope trace or count the stars in a certain quadrant of a plate we have exposed. And eventually we figure out that the fundamental explanation of things involves something like the quantum phenomena that were developed in modern physics of the 21st century, or the 20th century. And we want to say, well, that's reality, but our knowledge of it, you know, its existence as a thing anyone is aware of, depends on our lame old, brain-bound, wetware-driven consciousness. So we're kind of trapped in a funny circle here about whether the principles we have discovered in science are the most real thing, or our consciousness, which we don't understand at all well, is the most real thing. There's no good place to start. We're caught with a chicken and egg problem, I think.
Yeah, you know, there's a question I don't ask very often, but since you brought up consciousness and you're so dang smart, Keith, here's McLuhan. He's asking a question. How about technologies as the collective unconscious and art as the collective unconsciousness? So, you know, he's separating art and technologies and then conscious and consciousness. So, how would you address that? How about technologies as the collective unconscious and art as the collective unconsciousness?
The way technologies work as a collective unconscious, it seems to me, might be in that they always have unforeseen consequences. Virtually always, they have unforeseen consequences. Nobody knew when printing. Nobody knew when the alphabet was invented what the consequences of that would be. They couldn't foresee it. Ditto printing, ditto microelectronics and the personal computer, and so on. So there's a way in which technology proceeds with unawareness of where it's headed. Yeah. And in that way, it suits the idea of the unconscious. I'm not sure about how well to distinguish the unconscious and unconsciousness. I mean, I'm just not real sure about that, the difference there.
Yeah, art as the collective unconsciousness. That's what I'm trying. I'm trying to get to that. I don't get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I also don't get it. I mean, it might be something like this, you know, for the people of the Renaissance who were surrounded by the wonderful products being made contemporaneously by Renaissance artists. They were living in this world where these guys were actually creating all these wonderful things. And we can't live in that world. You can try to imagine what it was like. You can read about what it was like to be there in a novel, or you can watch a movie about what it was like to be there, but you're just not there.
Yeah.
But we might be able to see patterns in it that the people who were there couldn't see. So in that sense, their art was unconsciousness to them. But we only can say that because we see the patterns. So we've made the hidden unhidden by seeing that pattern, if it's really there, which we will debate without being able to resolve it. I think.
Yeah, that's a big McLuhan thing, is studying the patterns. Pattern recognition can lead to comprehensive awareness, the big picture. So if you have suspended judgment, then you can step back and sort of study, like Pascal, the mathematician philosopher. There's this end of the spectrum and that end of the spectrum and everything in between. You get the big picture, which led to McLuhan saying understanding is not having a point of view. You don't go, I love cell phones or I hate cell phones. You say, hey, we live in a cell phone world. How has it shaped our behavior? And how do I cope with it? Because, I was lecturing once to these art students, and I said, everybody in this room has a cell phone, right? And they go, yep. And one woman raised her hand. I goes, I don't. I goes, everybody sort of snickered. And why not? Well, I lost it. And I goes, well, I'm going to get it back in a week. But I says, well, you're a perfect example. You're fasting. You're without it. You lived in a cell phone world and now you don't have it. This is a good example. How does it make you feel? And she says, I have clarity.
Huh.
So that was a really good example of, we don't know how to live in a non-book world, a non-printed matter world, or a non-electricity world.
Yeah.
Because that's all we've lived in,
Well, we can get a little taste of it. You can go camping and not have electricity or shelter.
I know, but everybody who goes camping now has cell phones and heaters and laptops and everything. But you can fast from these various things for sure. But it is also a conscious fast. Like when COVID hit, I ride my bike down the street and there were no cars and animals were running all around.
Yep.
It was like, are we back in heaven finally?
No, it was a zombie apocalypse and you missed it.
Yeah. So. It happened the other day, actually, on Christmas. I took my bike ride at 6 a.m. and there were no cars. And I was like amazed. I was like, wow, free.
So how far, where is Venice on the grid, on the LA grid, between like Seal Beach and Malibu? How far up is it from Central
Venice
LA?
is south of Malibu, Pacific Palisades.
But north of the Central LA area?
Yeah, well, LA is sort of there, and then we're not north or south. We're just sort of in the middle on the beach. Yeah.
I have already never been to the Bay Area, to the Los Angeles area, but I've been to the San Francisco Bay Area twice. But I once stayed a few days at Seal Beach, and I thought it was really terrific. I could see how you get used to living at a Pacific beach town. Oh
yeah, we're super lucky. But Keith, I asked for 90 minutes, and it's 90, and I was wondering if we could just schedule part 2 6 months down the line and do the rest of the questions, and we can definitely get into film more. I really appreciated your time and energy here, and I thought your knowledge of literature is astounding. And do consider joining the Finnegan's Wake group in Venice and in Texas, because
are they on Zoom? Are they also on Zoom?
They're both on Zoom, yeah, and the double.
I will give them a try. I will communicate with you about that. I'll try to talk to them coming along also.
The Dublin one is amazing, is really good too. So thank you so much, Keith. It's really been enlightening. And even though I'm going to hit the stop, the end broadcast button, I hope we can keep talking forever and ever.
I'll see you at the Wake group.
Thank you, Keith.
Bye-bye.
Really appreciate it.